Hi everybody and welcome to yet another episode of Guest Safety Officer Lobby Group. Well, what can I say? You're not going to believe who we've got today, but unfortunately, we've still got Gary. Gary's still. I can't do anything about that, but he insists on putting in an appearance. But we've got Professor Simon Moore from Cardiff University. Now, let me tell you, people, I can't say anymore because his title of the things that he does is so long, I couldn't remember it all. I certainly aren't skilled enough to write it all down. So what we're going to do very quickly is we're going to introduce Gary and me, and then we'll let Professor Simon Moore speak for himself, because I think that's a smart thing to do. Right, Gary, if you could give us your rundown. What do you do?
Thanks, Ian. Much appreciated. I do love my intros with you. They get better each week. Yes, my name's Gary Twining-Wright. I'm a security consultant. I've been in the industry for 37 years. I'm trained the trainer in the industry. I've trained security officers, close protection officers. I've probably done most things in the security world. Well, I have done most things in the security world, apart from cyber security. As I've always said, that is not my bag, and I'm not interested in doing anything to play with computers in that way. And also, I do have a diploma against violence and aggression. There you go, Ian, just to boost myself up there.
Well done, Gary. So it's been well worth coming on the show, hasn't it? Yeah, I'm Ian Fox, and basically I'm a generalist. I like lots of different things. I'm very interested in what's going on in the world, and we're trying to make things better and create civilized spaces out there. We do it because we get good guests on, and we've got an absolute stonker of a guest now, Professor Simon Moore. Please, Simon, tell us about yourself, what you do.
I don't know if I could live up to that intro, Ian, to be honest. They call me Professor of Public Health Research. I'm based in Cardiff University, and I'm Director of the Violence Research Group, but also Co-Director of the Security, Crime and Intelligence Institute, which is a broader category of activity around crime more generally and disinformation and so forth. But in the Violence Research Group, we have a particular interest in protecting the NHS from the effects of violence. This is not to belittle violence that doesn't end up in A&E, but this is our main focus. We want to stop people ending up in A&E with very significant harms, because it's problematic not only for the NHS, but the victims and the whole community of people that need and rely on the NHS. And of course, it's preventable. So that's our main aim, really, stopping people getting into hospital.
How did so there you are as a young boy, you're thinking to yourself, when I grow up, I want to be a professor of preventing harms in society from the NHS. How did you make that journey, that step? What was it, each bit? What was it?
Well, when I was a kid, I wanted to be an astronaut.
Yes.
Unfortunately, they didn't have a big enough rocket to lift me up into space. So, no, I followed the usual track. I actually studied psychology when I was younger. Ended up doing a PhD in psychology, but I always wanted to apply it in some way. I wanted to be able to see the fruits of my labour reflected in a better world. And, I started off more generally in crime, but then I found a particular avenue, working with colleagues who were surgeons and consultants in preventing violent crime. For a maxillofacial surgeon, for example, up to 60% of their list will be people who have received facial injuries due to violence. So this is a very immediate, very costly category of patient, and it's something that we can work with and look to prevent going forward. So,
so I just want to clarify that, because you made it 60%.
Up to 60%
of people. Oh, and that's as a result of violence.
Yes. Yeah.
Gary, what did you know that?
Is it? I was going to say, is that just in your area, or is that nationwide?
Well, no, this is the colleagues that I work with in Cardiff. So obviously, there's going to be a lot of variation. If you're a maxillofacial surgeon, perhaps in sleepy Dorset, in a less urban environment, perhaps it's going to be a lot less. But then also, if you go to some areas of London, perhaps it's going to be a lot higher. And there's also, this probably isn't the right term, but there's like trends in violence. So obviously, the face tends to get it. People punch and lash out at the face, but you've also got people stamping on other people's heads, which causes facial injuries. And bottles and other instruments like that as well will be used. But obviously, with knife crime, it's more to the chest and stomach. So there are trends, and I'm sure that level will come and go over time. But the point is that this is just one category of consultant that would deal with the consequences of violence. There's an awful lot of medical specialities needed, and it's hugely costly to the NHS to deal with it. And this is where the big issue is. There's only so many specialists in the NHS, and if their time is taken up disproportionately by this category of person, it pushes other people out. And that's a problem not only for the victims themselves, but then other people in the community. They become affected because the NHS is having to deal with these problems as well. So
Sorry, is this generally what was it? Is this generally aimed at the nighttime economy? Is it a higher at that time of night from weekends, or is this a general through the week in your area?
It absolutely peaks Friday night and Saturday night. Sunday nights, if there's a bank holiday the following day. Those are the peak times for people walking through the doors in A&E with assault-related injuries, by a long way.
It's just staggering, isn't it? So you've decided, obviously, the astronaut thing didn't work, but I'm really glad that you are doing what you're doing. So what was the sort of next step, in that? So how, because I do know you worked with Professor Shepherd to begin with, didn't you? And Cardiff, as a particular, I don't know, I call it the epicentre of research into this particular area within the nighttime economy. So is that why you went to Cardiff? And why do I have that opinion of Cardiff?
I think in terms of innovation, Wales generally is quite fortunate, because for Wales, it's we've got the Welsh government, which is quite proactive, but also is big enough to do some really groundbreaking research, but small enough to make it manageable. So we've done, for example, trials of interventions by local authority across Wales, and it's absolutely doable. So I think first and foremost, it's the environment is right. Then obviously the university, we've got a good university in Cardiff that's supportive of innovation and pushes forward for that. But then, we've got characters like John Shepherd, who have innovated and have pushed forward those innovations and made a difference. So now in the NHS contract, for example, accident and emergency clinics will collect data on the patient's circumstances if they were assaulted. One of the big things for commissioners and the like is they need to see the evidence of a particular issue to be able to respond to it. So for A&E to collect evidence of assault, it gives them that data to understand the magnitude of the problem, and therefore they can consider putting resources in place. So that's a very important little innovation there that has made a big change. So now we're getting much more reliable health service data on violence. And that was very much pioneered by John and my colleagues Vasi Varajasingham as well. But more generally, I think that we've been able to work across disciplines as well. Violence is a very interdisciplinary problem. So bringing in expertise from psychology, sociology, computer science, mathematics, economics, etc., is important if you're going to do this properly. No one person can lead the whole kabang, if you like. So we have a very good place where we are at the moment, in that the university is encouraging those interdisciplinary relationships, and that helps us then take forward the research agenda, which ultimately leads to improvements in prevention.
How is this being replicated across the UK?
What I research,
Your kind of your research and the innovative approaches that you're taking, are other NHS trusts taking exactly the same view and giving the support that you're receiving?
well, there's the NHS, and then there's the sort of academic world of universities and so forth. Yeah. I think we're quite unusual in that we have this overlap of health and academic work. And also we're probably a little bit unusual in the magnitude of some of the work that we're able to do. We can do whole population studies on violence, and we have made differences to national legislation. I think in terms of impact, we're a little bit unusual in that respect.
All right. That's it. So let's turn to one of the hot topics at the moment, which is knife crime. Something that we are certainly seeing an increase of here in the UK, and the little bit of research that I've been able to do, with what I have access to, it says that it's becoming, well, it is endemic to a large extent. What's your view? How are you seeing, and how is Cardiff and how is Wales seeing knife crime? Is it on the rise?
I think that it is bubbling up a little bit more than we would hope for. Certainly, data I've looked at suggests there has been an increase, particularly in serious injuries from weapons-related assaults. There's also some cultural issues as well, in that we've gone online, and this is creating kind of groupings of individuals based around where they live, like a housing estate. It's very much drugs related as well. It can have a particular type of music associated with it. And what these individuals do is use social media to antagonize each other. And there's a glorification of the violence, particularly violence where somebody gets stabbed, unfortunately. And there are people who are releasing singles that end up in the charts and music festivals, glorifying the death of certain individuals. And I think this is incredibly worrying, because what this is seeing then is becoming mainstreamed and normalized. So for certain sections of youth, picking up and having a knife is seen as a positive, a way of bigging themselves up, if you like. So I think it is becoming an issue. I think it is rising, and I think it is becoming more and more important. For the NHS, still, it's the bread and butter of violence is just people in town on a Friday night fawning out and getting seriously assaulted. It's not just knives. I think knives are fairly unusual in those circumstances, but obviously they are still present. So it's something we need to keep a very close eye on, and certainly look for ways to mitigate going forward.
Gary, what do you think of that?
I was just contemplating that, thanks, Ian, because what it takes, we're talking about knife crime and violence as a whole, but I was just just took me back to a time of probably about a good 20 years ago. I was working in North London, and knife crime was fairly high there. And I remember working. It was a lone door. I was there by myself. And that night, it was the first night I actually worked this premises, and I took 14 knives off the door of people trying to get into the nightclub where I was working. 14 knives. Now, over the years, I've seen the knife crime's always been there, but I've seen a big demise. It started leveling off, and as Professor Simon says, it's now coming back a lot bigger. We're not seeing so much where we're working in events and what's it called? We're working in events and bars and bits and pieces because of searching procedures which come into play, and obviously people get searched and they bring stuff in. But one thing does remind me, we were talking about the music and what have you. I think back in 2018, it was 2018, Garage Nation over in South London, they had a big stabbing literally in the middle of it. And I can't remember if the young man died or not. But again, that was all about the music. And God knows how someone managed to get a knife in, but they did, and the person got stabbed. So the increase is definitely happening. We're seeing a higher increase of people, of more knife-related incidents, but also violence is currently going up tenfold. I believe when I spoke to Oli from Acorn the other week, from his company alone, they've had 18 staff assaults. That's staff assaults to them. So there, the company I consult for, my wife's company, since January, their staff had 10 assaults. So yeah, the violence is definitely going up, and for some reason I don't know why, but things are getting worse out there.
Is it? Do you think that that this is part of the evolution? Because obviously being an old gammon like myself, I remember the days when they had knife amnesties for the rockers, the mods and rockers, and an old singer, Vaughan, I think his name was, can't remember. He got, yeah, I know, but you've got to understand that this is not a new thing. Knife crime, knives were carried regularly by a lot of people for a long time, and then it sort of faded out, but it seems that it does seem that it's on the rise again. I mean, what's your view, Simon?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we've done some work around reasons why people carry a weapon, and there's a bunch of reasons. Some of it can be very instrumental. That is, they carry a weapon because they're going to rob someone, and they want that extra reassurance that their victim will comply. There are some people that will carry a weapon for self-defense because they're scared of being victimized. A classic there is a woman that would have a hairbrush in her bag but will sharpen the handle so it becomes a sharp implement. But then you kind of have these people now, which is new in a way, is bigging themselves up by carrying a weapon, and it's like Gary said, it seems to be cultural in an extent, or gang related. It's happening because they want to show off. So they'll go and find the latest machete online or the latest hunting knife, and they'll go and find that. But of course, if they're doing that and they're carrying that weapon, then there's a greater chance they're going to use it in that kind of place where cultures or groups or gangs can. So I think, from my point of view as an academic, it's absolutely fascinating, but at the same time, it's really quite tragic because there are young people who are losing their lives because of this, and it's something that can be prevented. The difficulty is how we do this. I mean, obviously searching people on the door is incredibly important, and keeping lies out of public spaces is incredibly important. But it would be very difficult to find a way of doing this for the entire population of the United Kingdom. You can't simply ban knives because, we need to cook and eat with.
Yeah.
it's really getting into the hearts and minds of people and finding a way of dealing with their thought processes and changing their behaviours in a positive direction.
So from a psychological point of view, what kind of interventions do you think are possible? And yeah, first of all, what kind of interventions are possible for some action to be taken to start reducing the harms created by these people?
Well, I think, you know, when you talk about behaviour change in a very general sense, the more you do, the better results you'll get. So there's the one-to-one kind of counselling and helping people in that way. So, like, let's take smoking as an example. You can talk to people about smoking and why they should quit, but then you can also put policies in place that make it harder to smoke. You can increase the price of smoking, and so on and so on. And the same thing with weapon use. You can talk to the individuals, and there are some really good third sector organisations out there now that are working with young people and encourage them to stop carrying knives. But then also you can increase the deterrence, so there's increased stop and search, searching people on the door. And then you can also bring in greater fines and punishment for people that are found to be carrying weapons. All of those things together will help drive things down. So we do need a coherent strategy here, and everyone needs to play their part.
Gary?
Yeah, I mean, putting those strategies in play, they do help prevent. I was just sitting here thinking, you know, I know another idea. These people, they don't actually understand the damage they do, or maybe they don't. I do or they don't, I should say. You know, when you are putting a blade or a sharp object to someone, you know, at the end of the day, you're not hurting them. You can actually kill someone. That's how easy it is. You know, perhaps these people need to see the damage it does. You know, it's not to be glorified. I don't know if that'd be the case. You know, let them understand what it's like to pack a wound, stop it bleeding, and they've got to put their self fingers deep or flipping knuckle deep trying to stop someone bleed. Perhaps that might change their brains and how they're thinking about it. I think a couple of weeks ago in Hackney Wick, there was 2 gentlemen stabbed on the way out from a nightclub down there. They both made their way to hospital. One died. So, you know, I don't know whether it's gang related or anything like that. There's very limited information on it. But
just if I comment on that, I think in terms of their knowledge of the damage they do, that there is a trend for bagging. I don't know if you've come across this. So what this is, someone takes a knife and shoves it up the victim's rectum, basically, which destroys that part of their body. They need to have a colonoscopy and end up wearing a bag. So this is actually a thing, and it is a trend, bagging. So they are very aware of the damage they're doing and how they're inflicting it in some cases.
I think, sorry, I was just going to...
Let me jump in there, Ian.
Yes, please do.
There was a thing a few years back where they were doing the bicycle spokes, saying that, and they were literally getting underneath the armpits of police officers and security officers who wear body armor, weak points, and because it's a small, you know, it's a small point, isn't it? A bicycle spoke. When you cause damage underneath there, you can't see the bleed, so you get an internal bleed. Yeah, so yeah, you're right. These people do know what they're doing, but I don't know what the answer is. To be honest with you, I love to turn around and have an answer and say, how can we prevent this? As you said, they do know what they're doing, and they've got some basic knowledge of the damage they can cause.
I think you always have to look at it like this: is what's in it for me? That's been the philosophy of my life. You know, of trying to understand people and what they do. And the answer is always, what's in it for me? Well, what's in it for the vast majority of these people is some kind of kudos, yes, but it's going to be money. You know, there's going to be a lot of the people that are inflicting that particular kind of injury do know what they're doing. They are well aware of the impact of it, And I would suspect that it's to do with money in terms of drugs. We're very lucky in this country that we don't have guns that are as prevalent as they are in America. But sadly, I think there is a shift towards that, as has been evidenced recently by a couple of shootings. But yeah, that would be me. There's money in for it. And the only time you're going to get, they're going to fully understand what it's like is when it happens to them. Teaching points, I believe they're called, aren't they?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Times when people are reflecting on their circumstances. So a lovely example of that is when people get a face injury through violence, they'll have to go back and have the stitches taken out. So they'll be sober, they'll be in a hospital environment and in a little bit of discomfort as well. That's a wonderful time to introduce the idea that maybe they should rethink what it is that they're doing in their lives, and maybe, not drink as much, maybe be a bit more sensible when they go into town and so forth. So we call these teachable moments. And absolutely, there are all sorts of wonderful times when it's great to intervene.
It's the other thing that I don't know what you think, Gary, but Simon, should we start teaching people about managing conflict themselves, how to behave in a public arena from a much earlier age? Because from what I see, by the time they get to a certain point, they get the appearance that there's no consequence for their actions. So
yeah, but how are you going to, you could say, well, that's school's responsibility, or is it parents' responsibility, or who is responsible for this? I think there's definitely a strong case that kids should be taught better social skills from an earlier age. Definitely. That I absolutely disagree with. I absolutely agree with. But in terms of taking responsibility for children's development and making sure that they're more aware, I think really that's the local community. And unfortunately, some of these communities are completely broken and people don't have those positive role models in their lives. There's a bunch of interventions about positive role, introducing kids who have strayed off the beaten track, as it were, to positive role models through sport and other activities. So responsible adults, basically, people that they can engage with and will support them. So there's kind of a relationship here. There's not a lot of work about whether it works, but I think there's a lot of interest in it growing. We've seen the loss of sports fields across the UK, and I think that's terribly sad. Having free and easy access to positive social experiences and positive social role models is absolutely fundamental. Now, of course, there are unfortunately kids, the only social activity they have is to wander around the streets at night, because mum and dad don't want them at home because they've got their mates over and having a drink. So that's that. We've lost a lot of the youth clubs that used to be around back in the day. We're eroding easy, cheap, positive social experiences from young people. The cinema is, what, 15 quid a ticket? A lot of kids can't afford that. They can't go to bars, obviously. So there's very little left for them to do. And this means that they're wandering around aimlessly without any positive role models. They're doing what kids do. They make trouble, but they take risks. There's no one there to shape those in a
says the man who wanted to be an astronaut. That's pretty risky as it goes. But on a serious, just to pick up on the seriousness of what you're saying, and you're absolutely right. There are no interventions when none of the things that were available when I was a kid aren't there. And Gary, you've been around since, what is it, Roman times. So, you know, what was it like for you?
Well, back in that day, we had gladiators, so it was great. So we put a lot of our interest into the field of gladiators. Anyway, but by the by, violence has always been around. That's what it is. It's always been there. We've always had the mods and rockers. It's always this thing is. It's always there. You know, growing up. You know, when I was growing up, and like yourselves, I mean, we had plenty of things to do. There's plenty of places to go, bits and pieces. But there's always has been violence. But the thing about it is now is kids are being made immune to it with things like all the PlayStation games, Gears of War, you know, Call of Duty. Again, look at the movie side and bits and pieces, and how in depth and gory it can be, and people become immune to what violence really is. So the modern society is, you know, you just got to Google stuff. You can see someone's head being blown off. You can see someone being hung, and a lot of these kids have all got access to the internet, and they become very, very immune to this situation. So, you know, looking back on it, and you start thinking, well, if they're not seeing the damage which is being done, you know, and they're not going, wow, you know, they've just become immune to it. Like, you know, Professor Simon said about stamping on the head. Now I can go back to 2021. I've got a video of a famous English rugby player stamping on a man's head in a bar in an event. I can't say his name, obviously. I think he was arrested because we passed all the information on to the police. He thought nothing of it to stamp on that person's head. Now, you know, he's not doing that on the rugby field, but he's happy to do that in a big event on an individual. The person he stamped on was an ex-police officer, big lump on the side of his brain, but he did not care. He didn't care what he'd done. You know, he was immune to that fact. Yeah, well, that's the way it was. Self-defense. That was a self-defense. That's you stamping on a man's head on the floor. That's not self-defense. So we look at the point is, you know, young people have become immune to violence, and that's the problem. They see it blown up on TV. When we were growing up, we didn't see that stuff. So, you know, when someone did it, said, "Oh, bloody hell! Wow!" You know. Now, okay, so oh, is that it? You know?
Yeah. I think just the question I would just want to ask you now, Simon. So a few weeks ago, I tried to raise a petition, and what I wanted to do was to get first aid in school, and by first aid I don't mean just basic first aid. I mean that they started at a young age and then would progress through the academic years to the point that when they emerge at about 16, then they're quite competent, can look after themselves or anybody else. The other thing I wanted to introduce was the care certificate, that giving them care certificate training. And the reason for that was, as in the current climate, we're getting older, there are fewer carers around, and that people need to be capable of looking after their own families, because that isn't going to get cheaper as the years go forward, and it is going to be more difficult. The final thing that I wanted to do, or the other thing, obviously, with the care certificate, it enabled them to mix with older people, bridge that gap, start talking about hearing different stories, different tales, etc., etc. And the other thing I wanted to do was introduce the spectator safety certificate. And the reason for that is they have to learn conflict management skills. They have to learn customer service skills. They have to, learn obviously a bit about counterterrorism, about several other things about being a human being, social skills that will serve them throughout their lives. Now, believe it or not, the petition was refused by the government on the basis that, well, we teach first aid, and it's up to and with the other two, it was up to the heads of the schools to decide what they want to teach. I don't understand that I can't take that forward, or we can't push that forward, because in order to help relieve the pressure on the NHS and social care, I would have thought that would have been a good idea. But, you know, how would you see something like that?
I really like those ideas, Ian, to be honest. I think they're absolutely brilliant. In a way, what you're doing is you're teaching people skills, and the consequence would be they are less likely to become violent and get involved in trouble because they have those skills. I think that's absolutely brilliant. I think there's a lot of money spent on having police officers in schools, and, you know, having people go in and talk and say you should not do this,
Yeah,
etc., which is kind of a bit parenty. But if you give them something, if you give them a skill, invest in them so that in the future they can use those skills well, I think that's the way forward. I really, really like that. Can I just go back to a point that Gary mentioned about video games? This normalization of violence, I think, is definitely one issue. But I came across a lovely little intervention by a police force. What they did is they challenged the sort of top 10 criminals, kids in their area, to competitions between police officers and them on video games. I don't know what they were. And of course, they loved the idea, you know, go in, beat the local copper at World of Warcraft. Is that a computer game? Or is it something I don't know? But of course, you know, these kids were then stuck there all day playing computer games. They weren't out there robbing cars and beating people up. Crime plummeted. But then, of course, the local papers heard about it and said, why are these police officers there playing computer games when they should be out there fighting crime? Right, okay. So this is the stupidity that we have to deal with in the world. That's that. The other point is that, you know, we talk an awful lot about doing something about violence, but violence, and I think there's something that you mentioned, Gary, and also Ian, is very much a symptom, and that's mental health, deprivation, drugs, alcohol, inequality, etc., etc. You know, when we've got all the systems broken, where if someone has dependence, alcohol problems, if they have mental health problems, if they have a broken home and they need to get away from it, all these things are becoming more and more difficult for people to find the support that they need. And for this reason, we can't talk necessarily about challenging violence without also considering challenging all of the reasons why violence and people get exposed to violence. So yeah, it's not so much violence is a symptom of a broken system. It's, I suppose, the point that I was going to with that. But yeah,
you think you know, I mean, I do take what you're saying, but you know, but I do have to sort of ask: is and I think Gary says violence has been at some point or in some measure been with us since, you know, the dawn of time, basically, since, you know, Cain killed Abel. You know, is there an innate part of it as well that's as much nature as it is? All of these things are relevant, and rest assured, you know, I am in no way they're not, but you know, do we have to also think about that as well, to put it in so that we've got everything in the round? Because it's really important to me that we contextualize this and that we don't, you know, it's all there. Why is it part of us as the human animal? You know, that is part of our nature as well.
absolutely. I mean, across the animal kingdom, you see evidence. I read a paper on lobsters fighting at the bottom of the sea. But you see, in that sense, it's all about resources, access to mates, access to territory, access to food. In a modern civilization, we shouldn't have those constraints. We should have a situation where people aren't, you know, fighting in the fields for the head of corn or the cow. I can't think of old-fashioned resources, but you get my picture. You know, we're not fighting anymore, you know, raiding villages. We live in a one of the most wealthy countries on the planet. We shouldn't be seeing levels of violence like we do at the moment.
Is that relative? And that's the only question I'm going to ask on that. Is it so? So in that, and I'm going to ask, think Gary, is it relative, or aggression relative? Because all the things that you've described, you know, lobsters, and I love that analogy, scrapping for resources, etc., etc. You know, but everywhere we are all fighting our own little territory for my family, to feed and water my own seed, to make sure I've got the necessary resources to make me happy. So isn't it always a constant struggle that's going on at some point, you know, in some form or another? That's, I suppose, what I'm saying.
I think you've got a very valid point. Yeah. So how do we approach this? It's kind of like, yeah, what you compare yourself to. So if your neighbour, if you buy yourself a nice new car, and then a week later your neighbour buys an even nicer, even newer car,
yeah,
all of a sudden your pleasures from the car you bought are probably diminished a little bit, and you feel, you know, you've lost out. If you win £10 on the lottery, you think, oh wow, I've won 10 quid, but then you find your friend won £100. All of a sudden that 10 quid isn't worth anything. You feel a bit miserable. Yes, absolutely. Context effects, this relative comparison and so forth is probably at play. Even so, there are some very, very strong signals that underpinning all this, mental health, drugs, alcohol, homelessness, there's a whole range of factors that are absolutely driving much of the violence that we see in our communities. And my thoughts are that if we could deal with those more effectively, we'd see levels of violence drop.
Gary?
At the end of the day, this falls back on education. I'm not saying it's the educational system, but the education of the human being. Because, you know, if we're looking at the fact is, and I won £10 and you won £100, I should be happy you've won £100. You should be happy I won a tenner. We shouldn't be looking at, oh, bloody hell, why should he, you know, how comes he wins 100? It shouldn't be like that. We shouldn't even be thinking like that, you know. And again, you know, you have a better car than me, and I should be going, well done, you've achieved that, and I'm happy for you. And if we're not educating people to that point, what are we doing? Because, you know, if you only got to turn on the TV, news never has any good news. It's always bad news. You know, you only got to look at EastEnders. EastEnders is not a positive program. It reflects bad stuff in society, and it hypens that. So if you're watching this stuff and you're taking this all in, you're only giving yourself more of a negative rather than a positive. You know, I don't watch TV, and I don't have a TV set, so I don't watch the news, and I don't watch EastEnders because of those reasons. But if we're going to look at educating people, we have to re-educate people. Going back to the violence as well, I mean, I've been a martial artist since I was 8 years old. You know, my mother sent me boxing, first of all. I don't class myself a violent person. I love the training. You know, all my training I've done over the years. You know, I'm a second dan in jiu-jitsu, I'm a Muay Thai master, etc. And it's not one of those things I feel compelled, oh, I've got these skills now, I want to go and beat somebody up. I've been in a training environment which has allowed me to elaborate those skills. And one of the things which you brought the points about the police, when I had a dojo in London, we had a thing with the local police. They used to bring young people in for us to train, and we would change their lives because they were suddenly involved. They've now got to fight properly. They're now fighting in a ring, and they understand that it's not a case of a one-way thing here. It's a two-way thing. They can get hurt, and you know, until the funding ran out, we did change lives there because they suddenly stopped wanting to fight, and then they were being more proactive in themselves. They were training more, they were doing more, and getting back to it. So it's the whole re-education of how we've got to re-educate people into a more positive way, you know, and look at different alternatives. And if we can find money and bits and pieces for these to try and prevent this crime from happening.
I think that's a really important point. Boxing, I mean, for outsiders, I think many people see it as a violent sport. But what you're doing is you're getting kids investing in themselves and thinking about future trajectories and how they can better themselves, which are fundamentally the sort of skills that we want to teach young people. Absolutely. But I think we need much bigger changes than are perhaps possible, because we have this very reward-based society, this idea that if you work hard, you earn more money, you can therefore have more of life's rewards, like the nice car and the big TV and the whatever it is people reward themselves with these days. And with such high levels of inequality that we see in the United Kingdom, you are going to see resentment. There's no two ways about that. Inequality will always dominate that. We can teach people, but are you teaching them to be happy with their lot? Say, you know, don't mind the fact that you can't afford to put the lights on or the heating on or feed your kids a proper meal, etc., etc. You know, when you've got someone down the road who's swanning off to Egypt or wherever people go on holiday these days.
Never been to Egypt. I haven't been to Egypt. But I know what you know. I know exactly what you're getting at. Totally. We're from that. I mean, at the end of the day, I live in a council house. Still, you know, lived in a council property. Live on the estate. You know, been in this estate, this council estate, 50 years. Yeah, I'm happy. And it's odd, isn't it? A lot of the stuff that you see and see around, it could be helped and could be addressed exactly as you say, Simon, by a little bit of joined up thinking, you know, doing sensible things, as like teaching people social skills, understanding that the key to life isn't being a pop star. But you know, it isn't, because not everybody's going to get there. It's being able to sit in a room and have a conversation with people that you love and who love you. But you've got to change the narrative to make that happen. And yeah, I don't see how you can do that without starting to re-educate people at a fundamental level. You know, but that's what we're here for. That's what Guest Safety Officer Lobby Group is going to help us achieve. Because if we create a safe environment for people to live in, and we can play a part in that, that's the first step, isn't it? Maslow, one of the things, Maslow's hierarchy of needs is, let's get safety, and then we can look at food, water, you know, energy, and all of those, so that we can gradually progress up the pyramid. What? You're saying, gosh, stunned a professor into total silence. Or is thing. That's only.
It's not the most cheerful of subjects to dwell on, is it? But I mean, I think you introduced this as it's going to be a humorous interaction between three blokes like they were in a pub or something.
Well, it is.
Here we are, we've sort of delved into the deepest.
But that's what it is in a pub. If you know, and I did say that, by the way, folks. You didn't hear that bit, but I was saying when I introduced Simon, we were talking. He says, "Well, we're going to say it's going to be like three blokes in a pub." Obviously, we can't have beer, but you've seen us having coffee. It is, but this is what we talk about. This is real life. And we're talking about real life issues. You know, you think, I mean, just to rewind and going back to the subject, we spoke right at the beginning about knife crime, because I'm aware that we're getting on for an hour now, gone, just as always. I'm going to have to tell you off as well. You've been too interesting, Simon. You might not think that you have, but you have. But the bottom line is, we talked about knife crime. Now, before we came on air, you showed us some statistics. Is there any chance that you can sort of talk us through what's happening?
I can certainly share the graph again. This is a graph that we recently published, and what it shows is the lockdown periods in Wales. So those are the sort of grey vertical bars around just after 2020, and then a short one before Christmas, and then from early 2021 and so forth. So these were times when Wales was in lockdown like the rest of the UK. What this is assault-related attendances in A&E in Cardiff. And when people attend, they're asked if there was a weapon involved or not. So a weapon would be a blunt instrument or knife and so forth, or not. And what we've done is just charted this over time. So you can see that we saw big dips after lockdown was brought in, which isn't really surprising because, you know, the number of people out drinking and socializing plummeted to a slightly lesser extent in the big main lockdown period. But bounced back, and you can see some more dots on the right hand side are now up to 50. So these are 50 assault-related attendances in the emergency department in Cardiff, which is a lot. Now, how much does it cost to treat one of these people? On average, £40,000 to £45,000. So you can multiply it up and you can understand the cost to the NHS of violence. For weapons-related incidents, injuries are typically a lot more severe. They'll require surgery. They're a lot more expensive. So we could be touching about £100,000 for these incidents. And you can see we're getting about 8 or 9 or so each week. So incredibly expensive to deal with.
So we're talking nearly £1 million a week.
Oh yeah, I mean, it really is incredibly expensive to deal with violence for the NHS, but it's not simply, you know, this is a particular view. This is one of the ways we like to evaluate how effective something is. It's just by counting the pennies and pounds, because it's a really nice, easy measure that kind of encompasses everything else. But you have to appreciate, you know, these people are in serious, life-threatening places. The victims of violence will suffer from long-term health problems, potentially, mental health problems, post-traumatic stress disorder. There's an economic cost that, you know, the opportunity for some of these people to get back to work is severely limited, and so on and so on and so on. So this is just costs to the NHS, but the actual real costs are a lot bigger than simply that.
That's staggering, isn't it, Guy? I mean, £1 million a week from one A&E department, essentially. Is that right? Have I got that right? I don't want to.
I think that might be a bit higher, but I mean,
getting on for
it's a substantial cost. It's a substantial cost.
So what we're saying, I mean, it's an average of what, £45,000 per person.
Average, you know, when you think about the overall cost of dealing with that incident to statutory services, yes.
Right. And the moment they walk into, it could be what, 2-3 weeks down the line, what have you.
So there's a police cost, there's the ambulance cost, there's the NHS cost, the emergency department cost, and then speciality, and then taking up a bed, and then costs in terms of the judicial systems and things like the courts and prison and probation. So for your average violent crime, we're talking around about £40,000
per person.
Per person.
The average, I like to the average violent crime, and that's not the really serious ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, geez.
Oh, that's a lot of money, isn't it? That's a lot of money.
Is there a value, or would there be a value in giving patients the cost of what their stay or treatment within the NHS has been? They're not going to get charged for it, but just so that people get to see just how wonderful the NHS is as a vehicle to keep people safe, so they can actually see it. Because I get the feeling sometimes it's just, oh yeah, it's the NHS, it's free, isn't it?
I think we're on shaky territory as soon as you start to mix cost to patients with free at point of care delivery. I wouldn't like to come off my fence on that. I think there's good reasons both ways.
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, it's just for you know, people to understand just what we get. It's just fantastic, Gary.
What I think, you know, it doesn't need to be the patient, but it's the person who's caused it. Let's, for me, example, let's use my injury from a few weeks back now. Before I bring it up here, and I know you like this.
Yeah, no, I know he got injured. So
the one where I nearly died. Anyway, so we know I got assaulted, and there I end up in hospital. They called the air ambulance out for me, and then I get transferred to things. That amount of money. Now the person who caused that incident. Now, how about if he was lumbered with that bill because he caused it? You know, because at the end of the day, I'm the victim, but the person who's caused these assaults, if they've been arrested, why shouldn't they be been blasted with a bill for the NHS for the victims' injuries? Because, you know, maybe they can't afford to pay for them, but they should see what the consequences are, you know. And, you know, about the NHS and the service we get, which is free, which is brilliant, you know, especially for trauma. The NHS, you can't knock it. You actually cannot knock it at all. They're there. You know, perhaps that bill should be passed on to the perpetrator.
Simon, we're going to leave that one to you.
Well, unintended consequences. First of all, they probably won't pay, and it costs a lot of money trying to collect that money that you won't get. So you could actually be building in additional charges to the NHS, first and foremost. And then there's the quite distinct possibility that they'll see this as, you know, these bills that they receive as a badge of honour. We've certainly seen this with students. They had a little competition in one particular city that will remain nameless, where they got points depending on where they ended up after a night drinking. Custody they got so many points. A&E they got so many points. Maximum points was if they ended up in resus. So that means, you know, they are very seriously knocking on death's door due to the amount they consumed, and they saw that as a badge of honour.
These are students.
These are students.
These are university students.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Well, I think badge numbers, they are young, independent adults.
Okay. Yeah.
To protect the institution, because, you know, there is always this debate to what extent is the university responsible for its students. And I think it's fair to say, well, you know, this is their first taste of freedom as young adults. They are going to make their own mistakes because of that.
I think I'm going to, I know we're going to have to call it, but I'm just going to say, you know, what you're saying there brings me right back to the thing that Guest Safety Officer Lobby Group is trying to work. These are the kind of people that they're the clever ones. Remember, so if they're the clever ones, and we deal with everybody out there, you know, trying to keep them safe in civilized spaces, you know, so they can enjoy themselves. But surely the time has come, Simon, when people like yourselves and within the industry itself, you know, we need to start telling people that we're not running a crash out there. It's not a crash. Yeah. You know, and that people need to be grown up. And it's not, you can't expect everybody to look after you. You know, wipe your nose, dab the tears through your eyes every time you get hurt. Yeah. Oh.
I agree. And that I think is time.
Yeah, and a bit. Thank you. So yes, last words, Gary, quickly.
I'm just going to say thank you, Professor Simon. There was lots of interesting information there. Love to have you back, because time's just disappeared again, because there's so many more things I would like to ask you. So, but thank you for your time and coming on board here.
Thank you for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to meet you. Yeah, absolutely invite me back. I'm always happy to sit around and chat. It's my speciality.
Yes, mine as well. Brilliant, Simon. Thank you so much. And keep doing what you're doing. As I know, you've done so much work in developing interventions yourself. It's not all been everyone else. You play a major part in this, which is why you are who you are. Thank you, Simon. Have a great day. Yeah. See you later. Cheers. Bye.